You're listening to Green Rapids.
Hey, welcome back to Green Rapids.
Welcome back.
Today we're going to be talking about climate change and a sort of crash course format. So we're titling this episode Climate Change 101.
I don't know what to say. I'm really excited. I mean, I'm really excited to talk about climate change. We were having a conversation at a C4 community event that we were at the other day, and we were talking about the difference between climate justice and environmental justice.
Yeah, that event that we went to was called C4, a call to climate action, and C4 was hosting that event to try and invite the community to really learn about climate change and how it affects them and what are some solutions that we would like to implement within our communities too. So it was a really great turnout.
Yeah, it was. And I was actually very impressed by C4. They put on a great event.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was like dressed up. It was fun.
Yeah, it was really cute too. Yeah, like on top of just like the fact that we were discussing some pretty, fairly heavy topics, and then, but then there's also like the hope, right? Like there's also like, oh, hey, but things may suck, but there's solutions out there. So one of the first things that we are the question that this whole episode is gonna answer is, what is climate change? Erica, how would you describe climate change?
I mean, kind of what we're experiencing in our day-to-day. Like, as an example, it snowed last night, and we woke up, and it was like 40 degrees.
Yeah.
So to me, yeah, it feels like spring, but yesterday it felt like winter.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it is the clear differences in your climate changing. It's not just because it's winter or just because we're transitioning. I really think that it's a larger aspect. So it's not just your environment, it's how what we're doing is impacting your climate as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So how your summers are going to go,
yeah.
how your winters as an entirety are going to go, how your springs are going to come up. That all applies to the air, the water,
mm-hmm.
temperature. So yeah.
That was pretty spot on. So NASA's official definition of climate change is that it is a change in the average conditions, such as temperature, rainfall, snowfall, and more, in a region over a long period of time. And the reason why that's different than just weather is because it actually tracks trends, right?
Okay.
So right now we're definitely in the upward trend in terms of our temperatures here. And because Earth is like a closed system, like higher temperatures in one place lead to more water evaporation or what have you, that can lead to more precipitation in other places. And then that's kind of why like climate change is more than just weather. Like it's more so weather over time, and we're talking like years or decades of time.
Yeah.
And then actually like in the last 20 years alone, we've had a lot of record breaking changes, like only in 20 years.
Yeah, well, and then you can also see trends since the industrial era.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just spikes.
That's actually when it started.
Completely changes.
That is absolutely when it started.
It is. You cannot deny that's when it started.
Mm-hmm.
We just, the way that we started gaining energy changed, the way that we operate our world changed, and it was like, boom. Climate change.
And if you think about it, like the Industrial Revolution also brought along like the start of consumerism. Well, maybe not the start of consumerism, but it took consumerism to a whole other level. Like all of a sudden we're manufacturing more things than we actually need. We are building more things than we actually need. We're burning up more energy, more fuel, more everything than we actually need to. Like it really just started like the age of excess, if you want to think about it that way.
Well, and I think part of it is money. Like money became so necessary to have. You had to have a job. You had to have these things. You had to be able to have these bills, like physical way of proving that you can pay for something. Like gathering wood was no longer cutting it, right? Like you couldn't just have your sustainable spaces like they used to have in like the 1800s, when like that was just the way of life. And so I think as money became more of a thing and power became more of a thing, the way that we treat our planet, or the way that we see like what our needs are, changed. You know?
Yeah. And that's absolutely true. Like, that's when people started migrating to the cities. That's when cities began to explode in population also. So, more people crammed in the same space just leads to, like, more consumption of resources, too.
Consumption.
Consumption.
I just think sometimes about, like, if I want something, I can have it right now. Like, why?
Yeah.
Is that the world I live in?
Yeah, in the olden days, if you wanted a dress, you better start planning it the year
You
before.
better know
Start
someone.
sourcing that fabric, start stitching it up, start sourcing your patterns, and then hope to God that that dress is still in fashion by the time you're done sewing it up.
Well, and you better not eat differently because 5 weeks to make a dress or, whatever it might be. But yeah, like,
yeah, it was ages.
I mean, it completely changed the way that we see things and what we value and why we value it.
Yeah.
I think that's what climate change is.
Like, climate change equals consumerism. I mean, that's definitely one of the fueling, like, attitudes, right? Like, and that's, like, one of, like, the social trends that is definitely fueling climate change, and, like, not just climate change, but, like, pollution, which we'll get into later. But, yeah, so.
I love that you do that. You did it the last episode where you're like, oh, but we'll talk about that later. Like, you just do this, like, little singing thing. It's so cute.
I can't help it. So yeah, and then so what's really, really causing climate change outside of consumerism is gases, right?
Well, and it's like it powers every single thing that we do. I don't understand why we haven't found a different way of powering things, but your home is powered. If you live in Michigan, your home is powered by gas.
Fossil fuels.
Plain and simple. When you turn your lights on, that boils down to somebody drilling for fuels so that you can do that. So, I mean, I like the switch to electric because it makes sense, right? Like, you're not breathing in that air directly. There's there's reasons why you shouldn't just be burning fuel for energy, but that's still what we're doing, no matter how you look at it. And we know that there are other ways of getting it.
There are, like, there's solar, there's nuclear energy, which is actually one of the cleanest forms of energy, even though it gets a lot of flack.
And we can maybe explain why, because if nuclear goes wrong, it does have a very large impact on the environment.
It does.
But the train derailings, the trucks that are transporting large amounts of fuel, the pipelines that end up needing to be serviced, leaking, things like that. That's also going to happen with every type of power you get. So I don't think that it's a worse option at all.
It's not a worse option at all. And, like, when done right, which it usually is, like, it creates, like, massive amounts of energy and for, like, a very little environmental impact.
Yeah.
Solar panels are great, but they are hard to recycle. So they contribute to plastic pollution.
Yep.
So
and they're expensive.
Like,
as a single person, not just single, but like as a person who would maybe implement that in my business or on my home, it is incredibly expensive, and it still leaves us being responsible for that.
Yeah, and it barely pays for itself.
Yeah,
in some
just
cases.
learned that.
Yeah.
So the reason why is because unless you can start up and pay for the ability to store it, you don't really own that energy. You're giving it to consumers for free, and they're still going to charge you.
What?
When I heard that, I was like, okay, why would anybody get solar on their home unless they could store the energy? Because consumers will just then give you a % off if you, and I don't think that it's enough to offset the cost.
Sounds like a monopoly.
But that doesn't mean that consumers shouldn't have fields themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the issue I see is you have all these ways and you have plenty of money and you know that we're going to use you. But okay, we can't talk about this too much because we're going to talk to Sergio.
We're going to talk about energy more.
Oh my God.
We
just got into
two
that.
episodes from now. Hang in there, guys. But some of the, like, specifically some of the most problematic gases that we have are methane and our good old friend carbon monoxide.
Yeah, and I think most people know what carbon monoxide is. It's what's coming out of your car. It's the CO2 meters in your home. That's from carbon monoxide. because of the gases that we use to power our homes.
And there's a reason why we don't want them in our indoor air, which is that they're freaking toxic, right? That's why people suffer from carbon monoxide poisoning, and yet we're releasing like tons and tons and tons of that into the atmosphere every single day. But there's solutions out there.
Well, and there's no way then that you can say it's not the reason why our world is changing the way that it is, because yes, air kind of seems like it just is nothing, but we're in an atmosphere.
Yeah.
So everything's trapped in there.
Everything's connected.
Yeah.
So the other gas is methane, and that gas actually comes from landfills mostly.
Yeah.
So all that food waste that doesn't get composted, when it's in a landfill and it's not like oxygenated, and by oxygenated I mean like, either like turned over or just like mixed with a right ratio of like nitrogens to greens and carbons. But basically, like, if it breaks down like the bad way, it's called breaking down anaerobically, and then when that breaks down, it releases methane gas, which is a greenhouse gas. When it breaks down the good way, which is, if you're composting it with the right balance of like carbons and nitrogens, then that creates, like, it actually locks in carbon dioxide. So it actually helps. So one thing that you can do to slightly minimize your impact is to compost.
Yeah. Composting is huge. And again, we talked about food waste. So if it's something that you're already wasting, you can give back, because sometimes it is hard to not waste some of the food that you buy or some of the food that you might grow, but you will get even more food out of composted soil. Like, that is just nutrient rich. It's so, there's no reason to not do it. I know it's kind of hard to start, but you also, when we say composting, you don't have to be the person who has the dirt box. Like, there are places that you can bring your compost to. Bring compost to a friend who composts. Bring compost to somewhere like the Southeast Market. They will take your things.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they'll take your compost.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and then I'm sure Wormies would too.
Wormies has a service where they will pick up your compost.
Yeah, so if you're not comfortable or don't have the space, because a lot of us live in apartments, composting is still something that you can do. You don't even have to have a proper bin for it. Like, after a week, you can just
stick
drop
it in
your
like
stuff
a
off.
trash can, basically. Yeah, and I think Wormies actually has some like trash can looking bins where you can just put all your compost into and they'll pick it up.
I thrifted one.
Oh, that's so
I'm
cool.
gonna say, for anybody who's wondering, I am a master manifester, and I have been thinking about a compost bin, but every time I go to look up one up to purchase, they're like $20+ for a bin. But they have filters in them. And so I was just at a thrift store the other day, and I came across a compost bin that had extra filters in it.
That's so perfect.
I know, and it's like the perfect size for me because I live alone. But yeah, no, it's encouraging me to think about it differently. And also, along with the waste management, we had a conversation with people, and where are they?
They were from the Kent County Waste Management
Okay, so it was
Department.
waste management. Yep. And we don't really know what's going to happen to these buried methane bubbles, right? Like, so what they do in landfills is they cover them with plastic when they're done and they're compacted down, and then that all just kind of like sits underground. And because landfills are actually something that's really new, the past like 30 to 50 years.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, no, it is. It's fairly new. I mean, just trash became a problem. Disposing of consumerized lifestyles became a problem. And so they had to learn how to dispose of this. And so they came up with the idea of like doing systemized landfills.
Yeah. So the first landfill ever was built in 3000 BC, which is modern day Greece. They dug large holes into the ground to dump refuse. However, in 1937 is when there was, like, I think the first sanitary landfill here in the States. And now, today, it's actually a National Historic Landmark. It was in California.
Gross.
I know. Imagine.
Should we go visit?
Might as well.
No, but the reason why I say this though
trash.
is because it's spent now. How many years? That was in the 30s.
That was in the 30s,
Okay.
closer to 40s. So let's say
It's spent 100 years underground right now.
Yeah.
Just about 100 years
Mhm.
underground. And what is that going to do? What's that going to do in another 100 years?
We don't know.
What happens if that little bag just pops and leaks into the soil? Like, what does that mean?
Well, that's the problem, right? Like, we're not trapping this gas in a way that's really effective long term. We're just kind of like crossing our fingers and being like, let's hope for the best.
And that's been the way that our country operates
Mhm.
for a really long time, and that's why we see the systemic issues that we do.
Mhm.
It's a reactive system.
Yeah, and I think it's worth comparing too. That, like, for example, like that first landfill from 3,000 years ago in Greece. If you think about it, that didn't have any plastic in it because it wasn't invented yet.
Right.
It was just like, broken ceramic stuff, like
Yes.
building materials, like, which back then was like all pretty much like natural building materials. So like their landfills are definitely not as toxic as ours, which are also leaching microplastics.
Well, and they weren't wasting food the way that we do because they were raising the food that they
Yeah.
were eating. They couldn't just waste it. It would have been like bizarre to watch somebody waste food the way that we do in this
Mhm.
country. I bet even for anybody to see
Mm-hmm.
outside of the U.S. And we live in this fancy little bubble.
We do, yeah. We live in a third world bubble.
But
that
that
is
bubble
okay.
is our climate,
Mm-hmm.
and that impacts the entire world.
Yeah.
And so, if we want to be responsible for our actions, I think we should start with trash. We should start with climate. We should start
Mhm.
with the way that we get our energy.
Yep. So something else that I also wanted to mention to you is that, like, a lot of people ask, like, why should I be worried about climate change? Why should I care about it? Like, why is it important? Like, and they don't see that it's really like alarming. And to be fair, humans have really short lifespans, so
Mhm.
a lot of it hasn't changed from when I was a kid, for instance, right? So like in my memory, I'm like, this is fine, this is normal. But because we have the collective knowledge of humanity and we have like all this data, we actually know that greenhouse gases are the highest they've ever been in the last 2 million years. Million!
You can Google this.
NASA has this on their website.
But really, I mean, we have accessible information too.
Mm-hmm.
We are knowingly living a lifestyle that is destroying our planet.
Yep.
That is plain and simple.
Mm-hmm.
And I've really been thinking about it a lot, especially with what's happened in Ohio.
It's scary.
So scary.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do when you don't have a place to get water?
Yeah.
What do you do when your air is not something that you can breathe?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do you go?
Questions?
Crickets. You can't
I
go
wish
to
I
the
had an answer
ocean,
for
and
you.
if we could, the ocean is filled with plastic.
Thanks to us. Woo!
Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
So, do you have any facts on that, or do you know what plastics do?
I know that they release microplastics, and a lot of times they like stop things from breaking down properly, which contributes to like the methane problem. Not to mention obviously the effects that it has like on sea life and wildlife that gets either poisoned by eating it or trapped in it, etc.
Well, and we have all heard of like BPA, but BPA is quite literally a toxin that is on plastics or was conventionally found in them. Now a lot of things are made without it, but like plastic is known to be toxic, and plastic comes from drilling oil.
Petroleum.
Like, what do we do that doesn't involve drilling out of our land?
Yeah, which again is like, if you're drilling into land, that's like releasing carbon into the atmosphere. So yeah, another contributor to like those greenhouse emissions that we talked about earlier. So it's pretty scary. Yeah, and like a lot of people clout like the price of solutions as a barrier towards like trying to fix climate change. But the thing is, like, it's gonna cost us a lot now, but it's gonna cost us so much more later. Not just in terms of money, but like in terms of like livelihoods, quality of life, our health, all these critters that live on the planet with us. So
I was thinking about that
think
the
about
other day.
it.
No, I really was like, I was at the store and I was looking at stuff and I was like, why is this my life? Like, I genuinely had this thought, why am I in an aisle full of anything that I could possibly imagine? And then, like, animals are just out there living their life. Like, we have such a warped idea of what it is to be on this planet. Like, this is not natural. Me speaking into this mic and you hearing it through your phone is not natural.
It's fun, though.
It's fun and it's beautiful and I love our world for it. But, like, I think
how can we?
Well, why are we so disconnected?
Yeah.
You know, like, I think we should understand maybe a little bit deeper where those things come from and the impacts that we have if we're going to do those things.
Absolutely.
Not all of our conversations will be like this. Not all of our conversations will be like this.
Yeah. We're not always going to be gloom and doom.
Well, and we would like for all of us to care before you're forced to care. Before it's like, oh, I can't escape this.
Yeah. So why don't we would like to give you a call to action, and I would like to ask you to just make one teeny change.
That's a good one.
One tiny change.
We could maybe like spend until our next podcast.
Yeah.
Right? So take 2 weeks.
Yeah, take 2 weeks.
And
that's a good way
in
to
your
frame
daily
it.
life.
Yeah.
If you decide I'm just gonna get a silicone straw and that's your choice, do that. Or if you choose to try to compost your food, you know, pick one. It doesn't matter. Walk somewhere instead of drive.
Yep.
Decide that if you need a dress, go to a thrift shop first before you just go to a store. Like, there's so many ways that you can just, if we all did that.
Yeah, do one single thing.
I'll do, what are you
going
to
to
do?
I'm going to start planting my tomatoes for the summer.
Oh, dang it, that was a good one. I don't know what I'm going to do. Ooh, I know what I'll do. For 2 weeks, I will only drink water.
Ooh.
Except for
coffee.
I was going to say coffee, and I'm going on a date tonight, so I'm probably going to have drinks. But I will do...
Those come in glass bottles.
I will not drink anything that comes out of a bottle or a cup for 2 weeks straight. And that's a weakness of mine.
Yeah.
That's why I'm a climate justice organizer, because I really like iced coffee, so I have to have my carbon offset.
We need to have the rainforest available so we can grow some freaking coffee. But,
So yeah, I will. That's what I'll do. Yeah. For 2 weeks, will make that step. Nancy's gonna take hers in prepping her garden.
Yep.
And we ask that you do the same. Pick something that is feasible.
Yeah, if you want to share what you did with us, you can reach out through the contact form on our website, which is greenrapidspodcast.com. Or you can reach out to us on Instagram and either DM us or tag us on something that you're doing to combat climate change for the next 2 weeks. And then, our Instagram is also Green Rapids Podcast.
I was just going to say that all of our handles are Green Rapids Podcast. So you can find us on most social medias. We don't have Twitter, but we do have Instagram. We'll be uploading on TikTok. We have Facebook. And then you can listen to our podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, on SoundCloud, and we'll link it to our website as well. So,
Thanks. See you guys in 2 weeks.
Peace.